Um, there are two witnesses that you're going to hear from in the next few minutes, Christian Adams and Matt Brainerd. They are designated experts in the president's case of Trump versus Raffensperger et al. And out of an abundance of caution, they will be reading affidavit reports and will not be taking questions. However, if there are committee questions that want to be submitted in writing or by email to us, we'd be happy to try to get back to you all at a later time. But we ask that they just read their statements today. And then, of course, we'll be presenting a summary of our case at about 11 o'clock. So I just wanted to read that statement for the record. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Adams. I think I noticed you were on the call. Are you ready?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you're there. So I've just asked if you start by, maybe telling us who you are, a little of your background, and the floor is yours, sir.
Right. I don't want to tread on Representative Trammell. I think he had something.
I was still has his hand up. I have two hands up. I said Chairman Fleming and Chairman Leader Trammell. So let me. I didn't get a message from either one of them, so I thought they'd be okay at the end. But let me go to Representative Trammell first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to object for the record to what is about to happen. Offering witnesses without the opportunity for members of this committee to ask questions is fundamentally unfair, and it bespeaks a sham process. We are, to the extent that this is an investigation to get to the bottom of it, we can all read. If they want to submit written statements, that's great. But I would ask that the witnesses be available for questioning. I also would like to state from the outset that the characterization of this is a bipartisan effort is simply not true. The recommendation to the State Elections Board, to my knowledge, no Democrats, at least no Democrats on this committee, are part of such a request. We had a successful election here in Georgia. Our Secretary of State has said over and over again that there aren't problems. To date, 55 cases in 8 states in 37 days have been dismissed. And I think that's a very important point to make from the outset. And I fundamentally think it is unfair to the state of Georgia for us to hear testimony and not have an opportunity to examine these witnesses. And furthermore, it is a violation of what we understood we were going to be here today. So I object to that process from the outset.
Noted. Chairman Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, I think my raised hand earlier was an errant hit on my screen. I apologize for that.
Understood. Representative Turner, did you have a comment?
Yes, sir. I would like to kind of piggyback off of what Leader Trammell is saying and ask you, Mr. Chairman, are we allowed to discuss amongst ourselves during this committee some of the things that are going to be presented here? Because I think we are very informed in this committee, since the majority of what is Georgia law today has come from this committee. And so if we hear something that isn't quite right, can we talk about that?
Well, I think both of our witnesses or the testimony presenters provided this morning, if they see fit to not answer any of the questions that we have, then they will have to be able to state as much, and we'll move forward and hear what they have to say, and we can ask them some questions. And if they are compromised and unable to answer, then that'll be something they'll have to let us know. Thank you, Representative Turner. Mr. Adams, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. My name is J. Christian Adams. I am the president and general counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. That is a 501c3 charity that is devoted to this issue 365 days a year. We worry about election fraud and election integrity. I am today appearing wholly in my capacity as the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and my remarks will be confined entirely to topics which have nothing to do with any expert affidavit, which I may have been filed in a federal court case in Georgia. I was formerly an attorney at the United States Department of Justice in the voting section, where I reviewed a wide variety of issues, including your own Georgia congressional redistricting over a decade ago. I was a presidential appointee to the President's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. I am currently a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. I confine my practice exclusively to election litigation across the United States and even across the Pacific to Guam, where I have had a case involving voting rights for the last 10 years. I would like to talk to you today about two things. Number one, problems with mail balloting that generally occur around the country. And secondly, fixes to some of those problems. So let me start with mail balloting generally. I have 8 topics. I hope that I can keep your attention as I go through them. I will keep them fairly short on each topic. But there are 8 general problems with mail ballots. In summary, a mail election is probably the worst possible way to run an election. The worst. And I have 8 reasons for you. The first is that mail balloting disenfranchises voters. When you run an election in the mail, you are turning over your vote to the people who regularly deliver you your neighbor's mail. The post office itself says that their error rate is at best 5%. They have a goal in the post office for political mail of a 95% success rate. Well, you all know that that is a 5% failure rate. If you are 95% of the time successful with mail ballots, you fail 5% of the time. The Public Interest Legal Foundation has been monitoring mail balloting around the country, and there's some very fascinating data. For example, coming out of Nevada, where we were able to track in the primary and delivered this information first, that in Clark County, for example, 1.3 million mail ballots went out, 233,000 bounced because of the bad voter rolls, which I'll get to later, and 310,000 arrived. So it gives you a sense of what actually occurs in a mail election. But the bottom line is that mail balloting disenfranchises voters because 5% of them are lost, and even more of them are not counted because of errors that cannot be corrected. The second major problem with mail balloting is it destroys transparency. In other words, there is a value to having both sides watching the election, and that value is there's confidence in the process after it occurs. Now, isn't that interesting? One of the things that characterizes the 2020 election among many people, if not millions of people in your state, is a lack of confidence in the process. One reason that occurs is because mail ballots are voted outside of the view of election officials. Transparency is a good thing, and when you go to mail ballots, you lose transparency, which takes me to the third problem with mail ballots, is that ballots can be voted by other people. What I'm about to tell you is not speculation. I will give you a direct citation to a federal court opinion that discusses this in great detail. If you want to see how voter fraud operates with mail ballots, if you care about these issues, please read a case that I litigated in the Federal District of Mississippi, the Southern District, called United States versus Ike Brown. I represented the United States while at the Department of Justice. I have a citation for you. It's 494 F Sup 2nd 440. I'll repeat that. 494 Federal Supplement 2nd 440. The case is United States versus Ike Brown. In that case, you will find page after page after page describing what happens when mail ballots go to people who are on the margins, who do not have economic power, who rely on the local government for their jobs, for their livelihood. And what you will find in that case are swarms of notaries, swarms of ballot collectors voting ballots for people. This was live testimony in federal court by the victims who testified that other people came to their house and voted their mail ballots. This is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy. This is a judgment in favor of the United States of America. And you could read the details of which. One particular victim was named Susie Wood. She was regularly having other people voting her mail ballots. They would bring them to her house out of the mailbox, and they were regularly voting her ballots. When the judge interrupted our questioning of the victim and asked Susie Wood, why on earth would you be doing this? She said something I'll never forget. She said, Your Honor, the person coming to my house always knows who the best person to vote for is. That's in the opinion that I gave you that you can read. It's not isolated. But the third reason mail ballots are bad is it creates vulnerabilities in the system. The fourth reason mail ballots are bad is because they're going to bad addresses in Georgia. I can't speak entirely to the Georgia process, but I can tell you about Nevada. In Nevada, we went, and you could see a video if you Google Public Interest Legal Foundation Nevada video. We looked at the Nevada voter rolls, and we went to the addresses where people are registered to vote. And what we found are vacant lots, mines, liquor stores, pot shops, casinos, and other places like that where people are improperly registered to vote. And here's the important part. Mail ballots are being sent to these locations. Now in Georgia, we can tell you exactly how many people on the voter rolls there were dead, duplicated, living in other states, or had more than one registration. In fact, we use the most rigorous protocols possible to arrive at these conclusions and we've been doing this for years at the Public Interest Legal Foundation, directly figuring out which are the improper registrations. We did that for Georgia well before the election. So the fourth reason why mail balloting is bad is because it ends up having ballots being sent to bad registrations. The fifth reason that mail balloting is bad is because it creates storage problems. Now, there's been lots of news stories about ballots in suitcases showing up and so forth, but I will tell you, none of that surprises me because ballots have to be stored somewhere if they're all coming in the mail. And that results in a wide variety of zany solutions, such as suitcases. And so what it does is it creates storage problems and it creates paranoia about when people actually see how the ballots are being stored. If you're in a busy election in a room and you have a lot of mail ballots, sometimes they need to be put in strange places, like under the desk or over in the corner. But people without election administration experience don't quite understand how hard it is to run an election sometimes. The sixth reason why mail ballots are bad is because you cannot cure them. In other words, if somebody's sitting at their home on the kitchen table mistakenly votes a mail ballot and fills it out wrong or does the envelope wrong, they can't fix it. They mail it in, and these are the sorts of ballots that get rejected, that they get disenfranchised because it's hard to cure them. Contrast that with in person. When you vote in person and you make a mistake, your ballot can be fixed. You can change something. You can spoil a ballot under Georgia law, but you can't do that with mail ballots. Seventh, voters don't often know if their votes are not counted when they mail them in. They check out of the system. They don't follow up. They don't have time. They expect their ballot to be counted and would be shocked to learn how many ballots are not counted that are mailed in. So voters don't even know that they're being disenfranchised. Let me leave you on the list of problems, number 8, with probably the most important one. I saved the best for last. When you have a mail balloting system, election officials are not in charge of the process as much. It is decentralized. There's no central authority watching the system take place. You can't see it. You can't observe it. You can't fix it. You can't make it better. It's almost like you've created a system of chaos. And so election officials should be on top of the process directly, not 3 days after it mails if it gets to the office. It's important that the very good election officials in Georgia have a greater role to play, and mail balloting takes that away. So those are the 8 problems that I've observed around the country over the years with mail balloting. I urge you to please read U.S. v. Ike Brown, because it will show you how a system breaks down when it comes to mail ballots. Now, I don't want to testify to y'all and not have a fix. And so I have a number of solutions that I would suggest that I want to go through with you very briefly. But I'm going to give you the most important suggestion that I didn't talk about, and you might wonder what it has to do with mail balloting. The single most important thing that the Georgia legislature can do is to ban private money from being used to pay election offices. That happened this year with the Center for Technology and Civic Life. It's an easy fix. I have written this legislation already to be introduced in other states. Now, why is this important? This money was being paid by billionaires into Fulton County, DeKalb County, other counties, because they knew the vulnerabilities of mail voting. They're well known by anybody in the election administration. But when you have private parties funding government election offices, like happened to the tune of nearly $500 million this last election, it is unfair and builds structural bias into the system. So that is the most important thing, in my opinion, that the legislature can do, is to ban private money from running election offices. The second thing that can be done is absentee ballots should be requested, not auto-mailed. The reason that is important is because the voter rolls have problems. And if you auto-mail ballots, you're mailing directly into those defects, into those problems. Next, absentee ballots should be requested for each election. People move, people die, people go into other states, they move away, they move within Georgia. So you should not have a system where you can request an absentee ballot for a primary and that carries over to the general election. Now, I'm aware that there was some litigation involving the Justice Department that relates to a runoff, but that's a different story. What I'm saying is, for a primary, the absentee ballot request should not extend to the general election. Next, signature matches must be real. They must be real and not given the short shrift, because it's one of the few things we have to protect against what I described was happening in the case of United States versus Ike Brown. I had the occasion to review all of those signatures, and I started to notice a pattern that the signatures of the people notarizing the documents as a witness or requesting them were strangely similar. The notary and the voter looked a whole lot alike. And so signature matches give law enforcement and election officials a beachhead to start to confront problems when the system breaks down. So signature matches must be real. Another thing that Georgia should consider that other states have adopted is having identifying numbers on the absentee ballot or absentee ballot request, such as a driver's license, such as a voter card, some other uniquely identifying information that proves the person voting the absentee ballot is the correct person. This is not expensive. It's not complicated, but it's simple to do. And that is to have some sort of voter ID, such as your voter card number or your driver's license number, part of the absentee ballot process or the mail ballot process. Next, a witness requirement is a good thing. Now, I will tell you, this was attacked all over the country, but it is a good thing when you move to vote by mail to have some sort of witness. Next, you should consider limits on how many ballots one person may deliver. Other states have already done this. Or how many ballots one person may witness if you have a witness protocol. The next thing you can do to both make the system work better and increase confidence in the system is to have centralized, transparent counting. You have to have transparency throughout the election process if you want people to believe in it. And I think wanting people to believe in the election process as valid is essential to the democracy and to the democratic republic we have. And if you have centralized counting processes, they have to be transparent. Next, absentee ballots have to arrive by election day. How about that wild idea? The election day is election day. And if you cast a mail ballot, you actually have to have it arrive. Now, I was involved in litigation in Virginia that the Public Interest Legal Foundation brought against the State Board of Elections of Virginia because they passed a rule that dispensed with the postmark and said you don't even have to have a postmark and it can arrive late. Now, that was in conflict with statute. And I brought a case against the State Board of Elections and was victorious and enjoined the State Board of Elections against following that illegal rule that was conflicting with statute, which raises another and final issue that I'll mention. You have to give people in your state the right to sue for violations of these election rules. How might you do that? Well, one might be a mandamus, that if a county election official is ignoring the law that you pass, that somebody has the right to go in and enforce it. So you might consider your mandamus either common law or statutory rules regarding mandamus. You have to give people the right to enforce these laws, because right now there's a patchwork in many places where the laws are enforced one way and not the other way. Uniformity is a good thing. But I want to close by reiterating how critically important I think it is to ban the use of private money in government election offices, because private money should not be going into how we run elections. We don't allow private armies, and we shouldn't allow private election office funding. So that's my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I thank you very much for everybody's time and attention, and I will close my presentation there.
Thank you. I recognize it was mentioned ongoing litigation may prevent you from answering questions, but I did have a couple of comments, and I think a couple of people that may want to ask a question nonetheless. Chairman Powell, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I want to thank Mr. Adams for his testimony. Very clear. Some of us that have been in political office for a period of time have always identified that the number one place for fraud, in our opinion, is the mail-in process or the absentee process. This was expanded back in 2005 in the state of Georgia against a lot of our wishes at that time. Now, that being said, one of the things, in lieu of the fact that the Secretary of State's office is not appearing today, I would like to ask a question of you. Some of us have said that we believe that the best thing that could happen right now, because of the failure of confidence for this election, was that the absentees or the mail-in and mail-ins, there should be an audit done on these to see if there is any organized voter fraud based on matching of the signatures and things such as that. Could you address that? That might be out of your realm, but could you address that possibility of how we could implement an audit on these?
Thank you very much, Representative Powell. Yes, I can address that from personal experience. And look, there's nothing, I think an audit would have value if it's done correctly, but I'm going to tell you this. I had the power of the United States government, as well as my colleagues, in that case I talked about, United States versus Ike Brown. And we had the power of the United States Justice Department to attempt to basically do an audit. And I will tell you that it takes years. It takes enormous amounts of energy and time and manpower. I just don't want anyone to think that you can just start looking at a couple of documents statewide and reach many conclusions very quickly. It doesn't work that way. This is hard work. And look, I think an audit is always good to know the truth, right? But I just want everybody to go in with eyes wide open that these things take time, and it's not always fraud. And that's the other thing I want to emphasize is chaos. Chaos lends itself to its own outcome. And mail balloting creates chaos. And you don't have to have a conspiracy to commit a crime to still get a bad thing to happen. So I would be all in favor of always getting to the truth. I just want folks to know that it can be a long, long road to get there.
Anything further, Chairman Powell, or?
Well, I mean, I heard what he said, but I guess my specific question would be, in lieu of the fact that we have upcoming elections and we can't pass any type of law due to the fact that we can't go into any type of special session or pass any ex post facto laws, but is there any possible way that we could do a sampling audit of these type of votes to see if further litigation might have some of these votes or some of the areas possibly considered for banning if they were not properly certified by the election officials? I guess that's the point I'm getting to, because if that happens, then that we could take it to the next, possibly through litigation, take it to the next step.
Right. And look, if procedures were not followed in the statute, that is clearly a serious problem that you could audit and catalog. And I think some people have done that. And I'm going to try to steer a little clear of that topic. If I was doing this, here's what I would do. I would take the list of dead registrants that I know we created at the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and I would look to see how many of those cast ballots. I would take the list of people who moved away from Georgia that the Public Interest Legal Foundation produced earlier this year, that moved away from Georgia, and how many of those cast ballots. That's not a complicated thing. It actually could probably be done in a day or two. But it's important to do it correctly, and not, as many people have made mistakes around the country. They don't think there's anybody else with your same name born on the same day. Well, there actually are. Everyone on this call probably has people looking at the board here with somebody, with maybe one or two exceptions, who have someone with the same name born on the same day somewhere in the country. So I think it has to be done correctly, but that's another thing that people should consider.
So then a step further than that, then, you know, to do a comparative list. So at what process would we need to move forward with that? And I mean, we don't have, at this point, we don't know what the intention of the Secretary of State's office is. You know, they had said that there would be an audit done with the recounts, but, you know, there was a recount, but no audit. And that's the thing that's been of primary concern to a lot of us. So legally, and I'm not an attorney, but maybe you could give some advice to that. How could we move forward to implement these type of comparisons to the local boards of elections around the state?
Well, that's a very good question. I apologize that I don't have an answer for you for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is I'm not close enough to the Georgia process. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Historically, Republicans have been the ones who have really used absentee mail-in voting, as you call it. But in this last election, we definitely did see more Democrats pick up and start to use mail-in balloting. We saw that 65% of Biden's votes in Georgia did come from absentee voting. And we saw that 35% of Trump's voters did use mail-in voting. That's almost 500,000 folks who voted for Trump who actually used mail-in voting. So clearly over time, mail-in voting has now become more bipartisan. And so it just seems kind of odd to me that you are testifying and launching an attack on using mail-in voting, because I just don't remember from other Republicans, I don't remember in general there being such an attack against absentee voting when it was mostly Republicans using it. So it seems to me that this new kind of upspring about Democrats, largely Black and brown voters who are using mail-in voting as of this year so much, it just really seems interesting to me that this is such a hot topic now about why people are using mail-in and exactly the process that goes along with it. I mean, I would encourage everybody to disregard your testimony. I mean, no disrespect to you, but it just, to me, a lot of the things that you're saying just don't make a lot of sense. And it is interesting that you did talk about your civil rights credentials and committees and things that you've served on, because you definitely have said things like you think it's okay to write down license plate numbers of voters.
That's not true. That's absolutely not true. Never
I
said
would ask
anything of the like.
You've said that people are
No.
playing the race card, ignoring the history of voter suppression in this country for Black and brown voters. So I just think that I just want to shed some light on the perspective of which you're coming from. My specific question is, why are you now launching such an attack against absentee voting? Because almost 500,000 voters in Georgia voting for, that's a lot of votes. This is a bipartisan effort to use mail-in voting. So just tell me exactly why you're launching this.
First of all, you're
Mr. Adams, please do not comment any further on this. She's made her statement. That's enough. We have pending litigation. I would ask that you not respond any further to her.
Well,
please.
I understand that, but she said some things that weren't true that I said. So I feel compelled to explain. I'm not coming at this from a Republican. I'm coming at this from somebody who's watched absentee balloting for a very long time. And by the way, I was against expanded absentee balloting 5 years ago before this was a partisan issue. So that's the first response. Secondly, those things you said that I said, such as license plates, flamingly false, and defamatory.
Representative Turner has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you said a moment ago, you mentioned looking at the list of dead voters in Georgia. Our process here in Georgia at the Secretary of State's office has been following very closely. And even our independent activists in our community who have been critical of his performance during this have admitted that they have found 0 dead voters in Georgia. Their concerns around our voter rolls are more about people who file a change of address form, move out of the state, set up a life outside the state, and then still request a ballot here in Georgia. And they've alleged some 15,000 examples of those. And so while I would agree with you that voter rolls are a key issue in making sure that they're maintained, and there's some things that we probably need to be doing better in that regard, not probably, we absolutely must be doing better in that regard. Because you had said a couple of times you couldn't speak to this exact process in Georgia, I think it's very important that we clarify, dead people didn't vote in Georgia in this election. Potentially, there were people who cast ballots that shouldn't have, that have moved out of Georgia and their residency is no longer here. And so as to Chairman Powell's earlier question about the process of doing an audit, if we were going to start, I wouldn't say dead voters because there just aren't going to be any examples of that. Our Secretary of State pulls the records from every county whenever there's somebody that passes away, and they immediately remove them from the voter rolls. Those reports are going monthly to our local elections officials, and so that process is key. But I do believe we need to audit to make sure that we are following it. And this committee has done a lot of work to make sure that our voting process is 100% verifiable from beginning to end, and that there's a checkpoint and there's a record at every step of the way. When you request when your application is received, the signature match is happening at that point again for the first time. The records of when the ballot was sent out, when it was received, that it was actually processed. If there were problems, we have in our state statutes things that allow the voter to cure their absentee ballot if there are problems that didn't exist 4 years ago as a result of the work of this committee, by the way. So I would just like to kind of bring to light that there are some good things that we're doing there. And if you're going to make these suggestions, I would ask that we focus on the real problem areas, because there's been a lot of misinformation out there that's cast doubt into our process. And that's one of those things when it's a red flag for me when I hear, hey, you could have dead voters voting in Georgia. Well, that doesn't happen here. And we've pulled the data to find out whether or not that did happen, and it's shown that it hasn't happened. I would just like to focus on the areas where there are actual problems, and not some of the things that could take us down a rabbit hole that will lead us ultimately to nowhere and give us a false sense of security, where we should be looking at the areas where there's actually a brush fire.
Representative Wynn had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adams, you mentioned that your group uses a rigorous process to identify potential issues with invalid ballots. Specifically, you cited some of the issues are erroneous registrations, and you also named other instances of potentially folks casting invalid ballots for one reason or another, including double voting. I haven't had a chance to read the litigation that you did mention earlier, and I will take a look at that. But I did have a chance to read about the lawsuit that you filed in the state of Virginia alleging that invalid ballots were cast by non-citizens. In that lawsuit, Social Security numbers were shared publicly, which resulted in the commitment of your firm to redact private information, identifying information that could potentially endanger folks that are being accused of committing a felony. And subsequently, your group was sued for defamation because it was found that these citizens, these voters who are alleged to be non-citizens were in fact citizens in the state of Virginia. Can you share with us how your rigorous process yielded a result that your rigorous process did not hold up for this particular case in Virginia?
Yes, thankfully, that was not our rigorous process. That was the Commonwealth of Virginia's not very rigorous process. And what happened there is the Commonwealth of Virginia was removing American citizens from the voter rolls that were actually citizens being removed as non-citizens. And so that is about as bad as a process as you can have. What we did is we asked the Commonwealth of Virginia for the list of all of the people that were declared non-citizens who had been removed from the rolls by Virginia. The Commonwealth of Virginia published that list and gave it to us. And incidentally, they are the ones who published the Social Security numbers initially, not our organization. And we took them at their word that these were people who were declared non-citizens. And it turns out, believe it or not, that the Commonwealth of Virginia, which, by the way, I apologize to all the Georgia legislators who get to hear about what goes on in other states. The Commonwealth of Virginia was declaring American citizens as non-citizens and actually canceling their voter registrations. That's something I think we all can agree should never happen. And we discovered it through this lawsuit by assuming that the Commonwealth of Virginia was acting properly. Well, it turns out they weren't. And we relied on that information. And we drew reasonable inferences. If the Secretary of State of Georgia were to give you, Representative, a list of people that they canceled as aliens or foreign nationals, I think you would probably trust it also, like we did. And it turns out you can't. You can't trust everything the government does. So, but thank you for that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mr. Adams. In fact, if the Secretary of State or anybody else presented me with a list, I would absolutely not trust it. And I would go as far to say, if I were to pursue litigation, I would not take anybody's word on it. I would actually do the legwork it would require to uncover that those people were, in fact, wrongly removed before I followed lawsuit.
And you actually can't. That's part of the problem.
Defamation
and we didn't,
against,
by the way, we didn't.
those people.
Let me just jump in just a second. We do have two other people that have questions. So I'm going to we're going to move to Representative Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. We appreciate your time, and I do not want to belabor too many points. I appreciate Representative Turner's focus on the NCOA process regarding the change of address. That is an area where I think we do have to be able to shore up our processes. But I want to point towards one of the solutions you talked about, and we do appreciate. It's one thing to bring problems, it's another thing to bring solutions. And your fourth solution was signature match, making sure that it's real. One of the things you did not mention was providing for or requiring an ID process within the mail-in process. Do you happen to have any type of an opinion on that, or maybe data that this committee could use?
And I actually, that's one of the things I would strongly recommend is some form of identifying number. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be your voter card. It could be your driver's license card. It could be a variety of things that the election officials have that you write either in your application or on your ballot to validate who you are. I'm not suggesting photocopying your driver's license. I don't think most people have the ability to photocopy at home. But something that proves who you are when you vote that mail ballot, that gives the election confidence that those are the same people. So yes, I'm very much in favor of something that is easy and doesn't have a financial burden on anybody to validate that they are who they say they are when they cast the ballot.
Okay, thank you.
And final question, Secretary Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did, am I unmuted? I think I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Adams, you already stated that you're not that familiar with our processes in Georgia, but I want to echo what Representative Alan Powell said, Chairman Alan Powell, getting back to the idea of doing an audit of these signature verifications. I would argue that it's relatively easy in Georgia. What both the governor's call for, almost all the members of the Republican members of the General Assembly have called for, is an audit of these signatures between the application in which they arrive and the ballots envelopes. They're held for 2 years according to Georgia law in the Board of Elections offices. And at a minimum, you could use the power of statistics and just check. And it's all about voter confidence. I opened the meeting in prayer, and all I want is the truth. And the people I represent want to know whether or not it's true. Is there fraud or not? And an audit would reveal whether or not these signatures are matching up with legal voters or not. And I think it's a very simple ask, and it echoes again what Leader Burns is requesting of the Secretary of State's office, and that would be bipartisan teams of advisors overseeing the signature verification process every time an application comes in, and certainly when a ballot comes in. So I just want to make sure that I'm on record is absolutely in agreement that we need a verification, an audit, if you will, of the signatures in each one of the Board of Elections offices across the state. Some sort of high degree of statistical accuracy. You wouldn't have to audit 1.2 million absentee ballot signatures. But that's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to have a say.
I got a last minute question. We've got about a minute left. Representative Oliver, you think you can get it in there?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to limit myself to a minute. In listening carefully, I'm trying to differentiate these ideas that are maybe legislatively proposed later in 2021. I understand that the Republicans are building a case for legislative reform in the future, but I'm sure Mr. Adams is aware that there's an existing court order in relation to exact match signatures and various other significant procedures in relation to our existing absentee ballots. And Mr. Adams, you're not suggesting, are you, that the rules be changed in the middle of the existing election that comes before us on January 5th? I'm sure you're not suggesting a change of rules right now, because that would create enormous equal protection arguments when we have millions of people that are voting every day. Surely you're not suggesting that, or anybody is suggesting a change of the rules before January 5th.
Well, obviously I can't speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself. It is not my prerogative to time these changes. That's not what I'm here to tell you to do, is the time you do this. I'm telling you what makes sense. Now, my understanding is, notwithstanding a court order to the contrary, that you already have set these rules long ago. That these are legislative rules that were passed long ago regarding how mail ballots are counted. So I would never suggest that I advise you on timing. That's your choice. What I can tell you is that I think you've already done this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, I appreciate you presenting and taking questions today. Thank you very much. We have up at 10 o'clock here. If he is ready, Mr. Brainerd, would you please, again, just start by telling us who you are and maybe a little bit of background, and then your presentation, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared with a statement to go through my background and right into my findings, if that's okay with you and the committee.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I've been working in the voter data and election administration field since 1996. I've worked building and deploying voter databases for the Republican National Committee, 5 presidential campaigns, and no less than 100 different campaigns and election-related organizations in all 50 states and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I worked for 8 years at the nation's premier redistricting and election administration firm, Election Data Services, where I worked with states and municipalities on voter databases, delineation, and litigation support related to these matters. Also, while at Election Data Services, I worked under our contract with the U.S. Census Bureau, analyzing voting age population. Since 2004, I've worked for my own business, now known as External Affairs, Inc., providing statistical and data analysis for local, state, and federal candidates and policy organizations in the areas of voter targeting, polling, research, fundraising, branding, and online development and strategy. My firm has worked for over 200 candidates from president to town council and over a dozen DC-based policy and advocacy organizations. I started the Voter Integrity Project after the November 3rd election as a volunteer endeavor to apply several methods to pivotal states to determine whether or not potentially illegal ballots have been cast and to discover other anomalies that could impact the outcome of the election. These are our findings from Georgia that I would like to share with you today. 1. From the state's database for the November 3rd, 2020 election and comparing that to the USPS owned and leased facilities report, it is my opinion that 1,043 early and absentee voters ballots were cast by voters who were registered with a postal box disguised as a residential address. For this determination, I had my staff compare the official list of leased and owned postal facilities provided by the United States Postal Service to the list of early and absentee voters' residential addresses. We identified 1,043 voters that listed postal facility as their physical address, which is contravenes the law in Georgia. In many cases, these residential addresses disguise the P.O. box number as an apartment or suite number. For example, apartment 5402 when it is in fact P.O. box 5402, etc. Second, from the state's database and the National Change of Address database and other states' voter databases, it's my opinion that at least 2,312 absentee or early voters were not residents of the state of Georgia when they cast early absentee ballots in Georgia. In conducting this analysis, I took the state's database of all absentee and early voters and matched those voters to the NCOA database. The National Change of Address database, NCOA, is maintained by the Postal Service, and the match process is actually run by the Postal Service itself. This identified 15,700 matches of voters to records who had moved out of the state, permanent NCOAs, not temporary, permanent, to the state prior to Election Day. Further, by comparing the other 49 states' voter databases to Georgia's database, I identified 4,926 voters who registered to vote in another state subsequent to the date that they registered to vote in Georgia. When merging these two lists and removing duplicates and accounting for moves that would not cause an individual to lose their residency in Georgia and eligibility to vote under state law, these voters totaled 20,312. The methodology of using NCOA to identify voters who've moved out of state is backed up by research, specifically an article titled "A Brief Yet Practical Guide to Reforming U.S. Voter Registration Systems," which appeared in Election Law Journal and was co-authored by author Stephen Ansolabahari, the Frank G. Thompson Professor of Government at Harvard, who is widely published and has a PhD in political science. The article recommends the use of the National Change of Address database to identify voters who are quote unquote deadwood because they moved out of the state. From the article, it is possible to develop comparable metrics of list quality and targets for improving voter registration lists. An example of a possible metric is the incidence of deadwood, obsolete records, usually due to a person moving or dying, on active and inactive voter lists using the National Change of Address and other postal lists, information from marketing firms, past vote records, and the National Registration List. Catalyst has identified records that are dead wood. The data revealed that 7.3% of all registrations records in the United States are dead wood. The methodology for matching Georgia voters to out-of-state voters who subsequently registered to vote in another state was done using full, exact name and date of birth. For example, a Matthew Martin Brainerd and a Matthew M. Brainerd in another state, even if they had the same date of birth, would not have counted as a match for us since it's not an exact name match. Our number for this is likely much higher in reality. Both Georgia and other states, we had difficulty obtaining reliable, accurate dates of birth for all individuals. And since having a full, reliable date of birth was required for the match, there are many voters in this category that we inevitably missed. I would point out that this matching method has also been validated by published research. An article titled ADGN, an algorithm for record linkage using address, date of birth, gender, and name, in Statistics and Public Policy, another journal, also authored by Mr. Anselo Bahari, states the following in his analysis of a database for the state of Texas. Either name or date of birth or name and address identifies nearly all individuals in a database uniquely. 99.6% are unique with date of birth and name. I would also add that according to the official code of Georgia, section 21-2-217A2, registering to vote in another state is specifically indicated as nullifying residency in Georgia and with it, the right to vote. Number 3, it is my opinion that at least 395 individuals in the state of Georgia voted in multiple states, in Georgia and in another state. For this determination, I compared the list of early and absentee voters and compared this list to other states' early and absentee voter lists that were available through the L2 political database. Comparing these two lists by matching on full exact name and full exact birth date revealed 395 individuals who voted both in the state of Georgia and in another state, a clear violation of state and federal law. It should be noted that not all states have published complete lists of their early and absentee votes, and we didn't look at election day voters at all in either comparison. Thus, this analysis was conducted on an incomplete universe of data and represents a minimum number of individuals who voted illegally in Georgia and in another state. The accurate total figure is likely much higher. The number of matches is further reduced by the same lack of accurate and complete dates of birth, both in the Georgia file that was released publicly and in other state files that hamper the identification of subsequent out-of-state registrations. Now, I'd like to quote to you from an article in the New York Times that was published in 2012. Fraud in voting by mail is vastly more prevalent than the in-person voting fraud that has attracted far more attention, election administrators say. The flaws of absentee voting raise questions about the most elementary promise of democracy. Voting by mail is now common enough and problematic enough that election experts say there have been multiple elections in which no one can say with confidence which candidate was the deserved winner. When just combining my findings alone, the number of ballots that are strongly indicated as being illegally cast surpasses the margin of victory in the presidential election, thus making it impossible to know who the deserved winner is in Georgia. Finally, I'd like to make a point about the influence of out-of-state non-residents in your elections, because it's about more than just the outcome of this election. When someone casts a ballot, not where they live, but where they choose to cast it, they are effectively nullifying the Electoral College. Similarly, I'll ask you to recall the great compromise at the founding of this country, that we were to have two federal legislatures, one, the House, composed of representatives based on a state's population, and the other, the Senate, where each state had an equal voice. Out-of-state, non-residents voting in your Senate elections also nullifies this founding principle. To the members of the committee, I am eager to answer any and every question you may have about these findings. I do respectfully request that you allow me to answer certain questions about the specifics of these findings after my testimony in current litigation, which I expect to complete within the next few days. You may email these questions to me for a written response, or I'd be happy to answer them via live, over Zoom, over the phone, and under oath. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some questions. Mr. Brainerd, if there's something that you can speak to at present, that would be fine. We understand the ongoing litigation. If it is not something, then I would just ask that perhaps you write it down and get that answer back to us at an appropriate time. I'm going to go back. I believe the first request was from Representative Oliver. You're muted, Representative Oliver.
No, sir, I was asking for the previous witness, not this witness.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got another one up there from you. Representative Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question would be for, with respect to the affidavit on compensation. It's true you're being paid a flat fee of $40,000 for your testimony?
That's what it says in the affidavit. Although to be clear, that was for another legal organization. And the campaign itself isn't paying me anything.
Who paid that $40,000?
Amistad Project. But again, the affidavit's in a case filed by the Trump campaign's legal organization.
On your Twitter bio, I see a link to a Give, Send, Go, which is a crowdsourced funding. And it says that you're raising money for the project that you're testifying about before this committee today. And to date, it's raised $674,696 that it says is going to you. Is that true?
The language is not quite accurate. I'll clarify some of what you said. All the money raised through crowdfunding is not going to me personally. All of it was used to fund this project. In fact, we've created an online spreadsheet detailing every expense that has been paid. Approximately 200,000 of that has been spent on data. Approximately 400,000 has been spent on call centers. And we still have invoices to log. When we reached $580,000, I posted and requested that people that were no longer asking for money, and that any money that comes in, will be dedicated to the project. I said that when we are done with the project, and we're nearing that point now where we will have no more expenses for it, we will offer anybody who donated money to return it to them because we have surplus. If there's any money that's left, sorry, go ahead. So we'll return money to anybody who asks for it, if given that we will likely have a surplus and that the project didn't cost as much as we received in donations. Any money left over after that will be given to a permanent voter registration, anti-voter fraud effort. And again, that tranche will not go to my pocket personally. It would just be going to pay for other things, but I will not benefit from it personally at all. So we stopped asking for money, and we've had a full public accounting. I'm benefiting not one penny personally from the Give, Send, Go money raised. And that's a promise I made and a promise I'm keeping. Now, attorneys have come to me and asked me to give them my expert, this is what I do for a living. I'm testified at no cost to the project at hearings in Arizona. I've gone to Michigan to testify. I'm testifying to you here today without any compensation. I'm happy to do that. I've turned over data to multiple agencies, including the FBI, including your state government's leaders, your Secretary of State and Attorney General, other states' leadership. And that's been given freely. That's been funded by the public project. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, the one question on the updates in conjunction with the Give, Send, Go, you had 32 updates fundraising that you would post on there, and on one of them I read that the vendors you weren't disclosing at their request. Is that right?
Because of the tremendous amount of political heat around this issue, the vendors that I'm working with have specifically asked that they not be named. So we're going to provide their receipts, I guess, but with with key information cropped out, like their wire number, their account number. But I'm also intent, and this is a promise I made, that I would have somebody independent of me audit everything. They would then get access to the vendors, verify that the vendors were paid, that they billed us what they billed us, to make it as transparent as anything. And I'm actually completely open to recommendations on who that auditor or multiple auditors could be to ensure that the money that was raised was spent how I said it was spent, how I promised it would be spent. I'm completely open to that, but I'm in a little bit of between rock and hard place because these vendors, some of whom I've worked with for over 20 years, have been like, please do not put our names up there. Like we put receipts up for Chick-fil-A up there. We don't have a problem with that, or Best Buy, or the other places where we've made incidental purchases. But these major vendors whom we've given, spent basically almost all of the money on, we're very apprehensive about being publicly doxxed.
We have Representative Turner has a question.
Mr. Chairman, I have just one more question to ask, if I might.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. Mr. Brainerd, two or three nights ago, you were on an interview with Lou Dobbs on the Fox Business News channel. And in that interview, you said that you were working with Georgia legislators. Who are the Georgia legislators that you're working with?
Your colleagues on this committee who invited me to the hearing.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brainerd, you and I have never had any conversations, have we? We never had.
I don't recall.
Yeah,
I don't recall.
I don't think I heard your name before yesterday. As a matter of fact, I don't watch Lou Dobbs. I'm sorry I missed the interview. But and I really don't understand why it would matter who's paying you if the data can be independently verified. Have you worked with any Georgians who have given you any type of leads? Are there any activists who have come to the forefront that you're aware of, or have worked with, or have told you this is where you need to look?
No, and when other people are bringing different approaches to this, these questions, right? But it was my intent when I started this project that our findings would be geared at nothing that would require any speculation, only hard data that could be easily reproducible by someone else. Anybody, with just a little bit of common sense could actually do an NCOA match on the early and absentee vote. That's easily replicatable. So is the PO box leased and owned facilities. That's all easily replicatable. So we really want to avoid any kind of bias, and that you can decide how you weight certain mathematical formulas, and we didn't do any extrapolations, we did a sample size, so therefore the entire population reflects the same. We never made any of those assertions. I've given names, voter ID numbers, records to other states, etc. Just really concrete things that are I would consider actionable.
So the reason why I asked the question the way that I did was to establish that before your testimony here, I had no idea what you were going to say. And yet earlier today, when Mr. Adams was testifying, I came in to make a very specific comment, and I made a very specific claim that there were some 15,000 people who had change of address forms where their registration didn't match their current address. And that was given to me by two Georgia activists who have been doing data analysis much like yours. And so it really doesn't matter who's funding it. These two guys are doing it because as a passion project, they care about democracy, they care about their country, and they found that there are these problems in the data. And that I said the 15,000 number earlier, and I believe you put the number at 15,700. So I'd say it's in the same ballpark.
I actually hate to interrupt, but I see what you're getting at. You're trying to say that these numbers came at independently, and there's actually a much easier way, to further validate that is that I actually have, when you run the NCOA analysis with the Postal Service, you get a receipt, and I have my receipt. If these gentlemen have their own separate receipts, well,
right.
There you go.
So, so that reinforces the point that regardless of who's looking at the data is going to say the same thing over and over and over again. And I think it would behoove this committee, especially as they go into the next legislative session, to be looking at that type of data and making sure that when we, as a legislature, give the authority to certain individuals in the legislative branch, that are actually following through with the responsibility that they've been given. One last question, Mr. Brainerd, and I do appreciate your time and flexibility in answering questions for the committee. As you mentioned that you have turned over, can you, the results of your findings to law enforcement or to the Secretary of State or other elected officials, has there been any acknowledgement of that receipt? Have you been given any indication as to what action is being taken as a result of you turning that over?
Well, I believe the only confirmation I got was the FedEx package that arrived around noon yesterday was signed for. That's the only confirmation I think I've gotten. I believe that's from the Secretary of State's office. I've sent the data to the Attorney General's office. So I've got no other acknowledgement from it.
How about to the GBI or any other law enforcement agency?
You know, I've not submitted the data to them, but if there's an agency you think in Georgia, the form letter is good to go. The data set's ready to go. It's very easy to understand. And included in all of my submissions is, you know, the open invitation that if any of this is confusing to you or you have questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. You know, I'm happy to help in any way I can to make it clear what these findings are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe Representative Nguyen had a comment or a question.
I do have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brainerd, I did have a chance to read through your affidavit and look at the exhibits that you attached to the affidavit. And you allege that there are individuals who cast invalid ballots, and you believe the claim you're making is within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. So I did take a look at the exhibits you attached, and I do want to share with you some of the things that I found that appear to be incorrect to me. And I'll just address these in orders of the exhibit attached, and I'll just, in the interest of time, highlight the most notable things that I found. The first exhibit attached, Exhibit 2, is a list of folks who were registered to vote in Georgia and have subsequently registered to vote in another state. Right off the bat in your affidavit, you testify that you cleaned up the list for duplicate entries, yet on the very first page of the exhibit, there are 3 duplicate voters. So I am concerned about the duplicate entries that may not have been removed from the exhibits. On that same page, what I did was I just took the first 10 names that were listed that are alleged to no longer be a resident in the state of Georgia. Of those 10 names, I found 8 property tax records that shows the voter still lives at this current address listed under which they're registered in the state of Georgia. They claim homestead exemption on this home as their primary residence, and they pay property taxes on their homes here in the state of Georgia. These are 2020 records that I will be submitting to the committee for review. Of these 10 voters that I researched, I was able to reach one voter on the phone. The voter verified that both he and his wife still live at this address in the state of Georgia, and he has only voted in the state of Georgia. He has a lengthy voting history that I was able to pull as well. From this very same list of individuals, one individual is alleged to be registered in both Georgia and Arizona. I was able to confirm her registration in Georgia and match her voter registration to a property tax record to confirm that she still holds residency in the state of Georgia as her primary residence. I cross-referenced her with Arizona's database and in fact did find a voter with the exact same name, and they are exactly the same age. However, the voter in Georgia was born January 17th, and the voter in Arizona was born on April 17th. The voter also has a very common name, and I subsequently just typed in her full name, first, middle, and last name. In the state of Georgia, 117 people share this name, according to White Pages, and in the state of Arizona, 54 people share this name. There was another similar scenario with another individual on that same list, registered allegedly in both Georgia and Arizona. Same first, middle, last name, but they have different birthdays. They're different ages. One is age 48, one is age 49. The voter in Arizona has not actually voted since 2016. I'm going to move ahead in the interest of time to Exhibit 4. And you mentioned this earlier, voters who in your affidavit, you allege that voters are using PO boxes to register and disguise PO boxes as their residential address to cast invalid ballots. In this exhibit, I immediately recognize one of the addresses. It's right around the corner from which I live, and I have friends that live in this actual building. It's a condo building with units on top, and it happens to have a FedEx center in the bottom of the condo complex. I reached out to my friend that lives there and informed him that both he and his wife are listed on your exhibit as having committed voter fraud by trying to disguise their residential address as a PO box. He subsequently sent me a list of all the homeowners in that same complex, and I cross-referenced them with their voter registration to confirm they live there. And then I also looked on your exhibit, and every single person that owns a condo in that building that voted in this election has been accused of disguising their residency as a PO box. I found a similar scenario for an address that is also an apartment building with a FedEx center in the bottom of the building. I know exactly where that building is because I have friends who used to live in that apartment complex, and a simple Google search will show you in real time that that is a residential apartment building with a FedEx center underneath it. Now, for those two buildings alone, I've identified at least 70 individuals in the first building that are on this exhibit, having been accused of disguising their residential address as a PO box. And on the second list, there are at least 58 folks that are named for that specific apartment complex. In Exhibit 5, this is the list of people who have alleged to have voted twice, one in the state of Georgia and one in a second state. One of the very first names on that list happens to be our colleague, Representative Tyria Nolowitz's neighbor. So we simply picked up the phone and called Representative Nolowitz, and she called the voter. The voter is alleged to have voted in the state of Maryland and also in the state of Georgia. The individual has confirmed that he currently lives in Georgia and has never voted in the state of Maryland. He, in fact, has not been to Maryland in the last year at all. He does have a father with whom he shares the exact same name, a senior and a junior. In another scenario, I was able to find an individual who allegedly voted in Georgia and also in the state of Virginia. The voters share the exact same name and age, but they have different birthdays. The Georgia voter born June 14th, the Virginia voter born June 2nd. On that same list, I happened to notice that one of the
Representative Wynn, excuse me, how many more on your list are
This
there?
is my last scenario. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. On the last, one of the voters on my list happened to be my constituent. I attempted to call her, was unable to reach her. So I actually just drove over to her house and talked to her and her husband yesterday afternoon. They've lived in Georgia their entire lives, have lived in that same house since 1985. They've never even been to the state in which they're alleged to have double voted. Earlier, Mr. Adams did testify that there are circumstances in which voters have the exact same name, first, middle, and last name, and the same birthday. Based on what I found, I'm led to believe that many of the names listed on your exhibits are erroneous. And these allegations are very serious allegations. You've alleged that these voters have committed a felony. When I picked up that phone and I called my friend and let him know he was on that list, he and his wife were very surprised to learn that their names have been attached to a federal lawsuit, and there have been no attempts to contact them to verify any of this information. So these voters, in fact, have no idea they're being accused of committing a crime in a public filing where both their names and their addresses are listed. And these voters are both Republican and Democrat. It's not a partisan list. So to be clear, there are many people who have been accused of committing felonies, and there are many common names in these exhibits: Smith, Williams, Johnson, Taylor, Davis, Miller. In some cases, as you admitted earlier, you use birth years, in some cases, birthdays. But did you use any more specific unique identifiers such as social security numbers or driver's license numbers that would have actually been able to prove that these people are not, in fact, the same people?
Okay, quite a lot of questions there. First of all, I actually want to thank you for helping to raise issues to help better validate the data. It's only with strong scrutiny that we're able to be completely confident in our findings. So to answer some of your questions, first, we never used anybody's just birth year. It was always, it had to be a complete match. In fact, because the default date for so many birth dates is the first of the month or the first of January, whenever that's those components are missing, we actually excluded everybody that was born on the first of the month or January 1st for any of our matching. Second, you bring up the issue of duplicates. In the total number of 20,300, is it 12, I think, that is a completely dedupe consolidation of lists. While individuals might have had multiple NCOA records, we have a completely unique list of county and voter ID numbers that totals 20,300. Regarding some of the other name issues that you've found and other issues that you've raised, as I mentioned, I'd be more than happy to address all of those. If you'd send them to me, I would give them an additional validation and scrutiny and get back to you on them.
I do have a follow-up question. As you mentioned, you said that you used complete birthdays. Where were you able to obtain those birthdays? We know that the Secretary of State here in the state of Georgia doesn't provide birthdays. Where did you get those birthdays?
Right. Now, you've actually made a very good point. Remember, I'm a third party independent of the government. So many of the tools that would be necessary to catch a lot of the people that we think we've missed and to do further validation, those tools reside solely in the hands of the state government. So the driver's licenses, social security numbers, what I presume would be the state probably has its own list of dates of birth that it's not releasing publicly. It's sort of set up in the scenario that only the state can definitively answer those questions. Now, in my affidavit, I don't believe I specifically accused anybody of committing a crime. I said these were indications over and over again. Potentially illegal ballots has been my language. Indications of illegally cast ballots. I've not accused anybody of committing a felony in any of my affidavits or declarations. But again, many of these tools are only available to the state, and I'd be happy to work with them and give them guidance on how to apply them and to basically prevent illegal ballots from being cast. And I'd be more than happy to cooperate with them on that. So thank you for your questions and raising your points. And I look forward to evaluating the names you've identified and giving you feedback and updating you on that.
Thank you for that. And it is true that it is hard to obtain accurate information because a lot of this information is protected.
I didn't answer your question. Actually, dates of birth. Yeah, sorry. We have 5 different commercial date of birth vendors, each of whom has a confidence code that they use to determine the likelihood of that date of birth being accurate. We then applied our own level of scrutiny to that to do our very best to obtain what is we believe to be an accurate birth date. And I would say that in the research I cited on the uniqueness of names, dates, and dates of birth, it says that it's accurate up to 99.6. I've also in the same research found that NCOA is a valid method for identifying dead wood. So I rely on that research and the methods we have. And again, I've given this data to the state. They are the best arbiters and ultimate arbiters of it. I really just want them to give it the scrutiny it deserves. So again, I thank you for your questions.
And I do have one more final question. I'm sorry. I do have one more final question, Mr. Chair.
Representative Nguyen, we're going to move on. Representative Turner.
Thank you.
Really quickly, thank you for coming back to me. The Representative Nguyen's findings going to people's houses and knocking on doors and making phone calls. Obviously, that isn't going to happen on a wide scale, but there are ways for commercial addresses with the issue where there's a FedEx at the bottom and an apartment building at the top. There's a flag called CMRA or Commercial Mail Receiving Agencies, where a PO box is in the postal service, even if it's recorded on a voter data as being an apartment number, the CMRA is going to indicate that it's actually a PO box at the FedEx facility downstairs as opposed to an apartment upstairs. In your data, did you look at that particular flag? Was that one of the things that you looked at to determine where those folks actually lived, or if it was an actual PO box?
We used a couple of different analyses, and we also actually looked at other just commercial residences or commercial locations that would not likely be residences. But that's a question that I actually have to pull the material up because, and I have to talk to some of my staff that I work with on this project. So I'd be happy to answer that one subsequently.
I would look forward to that. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. We're going to kind of move into a quick at ease recess for about 10 minutes, and which we'll come back and begin with the next presenter if they'd be ready a few minutes ahead of time. Mr. Smith, is that acceptable?
Yes, it would be, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, we'll suspend until 10:50, and then we'll get started back again.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.